Hi, fifth graders. Today's lesson is 7-2, finding common denominators. We're going to find common denominators for fractions with unlike denominators. And we are on page 273 in your Envision Volume 1 textbook. So you should have already watched your visual learning video. And with that, we're on page 274, and you found common denominators with basically pictures that were partitioned to show the fraction amounts, to find equivalent fractions. And common denominators, meaning the same denominator, so you can easily compare them. Solve and share. Sue wants half of a rectangular pan of cornbread. Dina wants 1/3 of the same pan of cornbread. How should you cut the cornbread so that each girl gets the size portion she wants? Solve this problem any way you choose. So when I look at the first fraction, 1/2, it's going to, I think I'll draw my pan to be 2 by 3 so that I can easily show you in inches how I divide that evenly. So here's our pan. All right, so half would be, if it's 2 inches here, half would be 1 inch. And Sue wants 1/2. Whereas Dina wants 1/3 of the same pan. So I did actually draw this as 3 inches, so 1/3 will be easily 1 inch each. So now I'm dividing my pan into thirds. Okay, half were 2 equal parts, thirds 1, 2, 3 equal parts. However, now our pan is divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because we divided it into 2 parts this way and 3 parts this way. So the half was represented by this pencil marking for Sue, and then Dina wants 1/3. 1/3 would be this amount. So obviously I've shaded over twice. 2 people can't have the same part, but I could redo that. This is 1 square. So Dina's 1/3 could actually be these 2 squares instead of these 2. All right, so here is Sue, is in pencil, 1/2, and Dina is 1/3. But again, as we mentioned before, when we divide this in half and then divide it into thirds going the opposite direction, we notice that we have actually divided into 6 equal parts. So 6 would be our common denominator when we're with 1/2 and 1/3. Notice 2 times 3 equals 6. That is one way that you'll be able to find a common denominator. It's not always the least common denominator we'll find later, but it is an easy way to find a common denominator. Multiply the 2 unlike denominators, those numbers together, to get a common denominator. All right, so let's continue that over here. On page 275, another example. Find a common denominator for 2/3 and 5/6. Then rename each fraction with an equivalent fraction. So we need 2/3 and 5/6 to have a common denominator. One way is to multiply the denominators to find a common denominator. That's what I was referring to on the front page. 3 times 6, those are our 2 denominators, equals 18. Write equivalent fractions with denominators of 18. So we start with 2/3. 2/3, we know that 3 times 6 equals 18. So whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator. So we're multiplying the numerator times 6, the denominator times 6. The reason we're doing that is because 6 over 6 is 1 whole. We can multiply any number, whether it's a fraction or a whole number, by 1 whole, and we don't change the number. The number is still the same. We still have the same number. So 2/3 actually equals 12/18 because we multiplied our fraction times 1 whole. Now 5/6, to get the denominator 18, we have to multiply our 6 times 3. So if we multiply the denominator times 3, we also multiply the numerator times 3. Again, 3/3 equals 1 whole also. Anytime the numerator is equal to the denominator, it is 1 whole. So 5 times 3 is 15, 6 times 3 is 18. So another name for 2/3 is 12/18. Another name for 5/6 is 5/18. Now we have a common denominator of 18, and we can compare our fractions. 12/18 and 15/18 is because we've renamed these fractions with a common denominator. Another way to do that is to use the fact that one denominator is a multiple of the other. You know that 6 is a multiple of 3. So our common denominator could be as small as 6. Since 3 is actually a factor of 6, 6 is a multiple of 3. So to get to 6, we know that we have to multiply our 3 times 2. Remember, we're multiplying times 2 over 2 because that's 1 whole, and that's not going to change the value of our fraction. It will rename it into another name, but it still is the same amount. Let me show you a picture of that. 2/3. Here are 3 equal parts. 2/3 names this. We're going to divide our 2/3 into, it's hard to see with just one color. Here's our 2/3. Now, I divide it in half this way. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 equal parts. How many of them are shaded? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 out of the 6. So yes, 2/3 does equal 4/6. So 4/6 and 5/6 is another way to rename 2/3 and 5/6 with a common denominator. We're not going to do number 1 in guided practice because that refers to the example in the visual learning video. However, we will do you know how together. In numbers 2 and 3, find a common denominator for each pair of fractions. So our fractions have the denominators 8 and 3. I do notice that there are no multiples. 8 is not a multiple of 3. 3 is not a factor of 8. So we're going to have to go with the first way. We're going to have to multiply our denominators together and get 8 times 3 is 24. So 24 is going to be our common denominator. Right. Pencils, what you need to use when you do your math. I'm using an erasable pen so that you can see it on the video better. How do I get from 8 to 24? I multiply times 3. So my first fraction, 3/8, I have to multiply times 3/3. Remember, that's 1 whole. I'm not changing my 3/8 to a different fraction. I'm just renaming it to another fraction that means the same. 3 times 3 is 9. 8 times 3 is 24. So 3/8 is equal to 9/24. I do the same thing with 2/3. 2/3, but I'm not going to multiply times 3/3 because I want a denominator of 24. So I have to multiply times 8. 8/8. 3 times 8 is my 24. And 2 times 8 is 16. So 2/3 is equivalent or equal to 16/24. 3/8 is equal to or equivalent to 9/24. Now they have a common denominator. You might be asking, why do we need to find common denominators? Why do these fractions have to have common denominators? Well, there's a very good reason that you're going to need to do this before you learn to add and subtract fractions. You cannot add or subtract a fraction with a different denominator. They have to be common or equal so that you're adding and subtracting equal parts. All right, so let's look at number 3. Number 3, we have 6 and 3 for our denominators. We could do it either way because we do notice that 3 is a factor of 6, or 6 is a multiple of 3. So we don't have to multiply them together to get 18. We can use 6 as our common denominator. You look at the larger one. We know that 3 times 2 equals 6. So again, whatever I do to the denominator, I must do to the numerator. So if I multiply the denominator times 2, I've got to do the same to the numerator. 4 times 2 is 8. So 4/3 is equivalent to 8/6. Now I can compare my 1/6 and 8/6 because they have a common denominator. I don't need to change 1/6, right? Because they have the same denominator. All right, you are going to do the same thing in independent practice on page 275. I've either assigned you evens or odds. You'll look in your assignment to find out. So you'll do those, and then you're going to turn over and do number 16 and 17 on page 276.